Welcome back. Firstly, please pardon a little under the weather, but the classes must go on, of course, but nonetheless, just have it in mind. You'll think it's a little bit difficult, practically difficult, but Be'ezus Hashem, B'chazdi Hashem, and Be'ezus Hashem, we will look forward coming through in a good. With success, with the help of the Almighty. So we're holding on page Tzadik Dalid, and that is we were holding the Achar Kach. So the line begins v'chulu, just a bit over half of the page. And the line begins v'chulu, and then begins v'achar kach, and then. So what we're talking about, it's a click away. Just go to the previous class and get have the understanding. And again, we weren't that yet successful totally in establishing this, which we'd like to. That the entire present class should be invested with the present information, as opposed to the previous information. It's not really fair, but I wasn't able to realize that idea yet, as we always try to, connect this class to the previous class, and then sometimes we say a bit too much, and part of the class is taken for with information that it's really a click away. So, but we're getting there. B'ez Hashem, it's going to happen one day that we could just really jump in immediately into the present information. And so the previous class, which is I believe it's the second class on this chapter. You could find it like on all the other classes on this chapter, the previous chapters we mentioned time and again. Of course, namely for the newcomers, that this is the Geras HaTshuva, the third segment in Tanya. We merited to conclude the Sharich of Emunah and the Likutei Amarim, which are all lined up on the left side of the website. In other words, which in essence easy to access. So again, talking about the previous class, literally it's a click away. So wherever you're watching it, and again we not only congratulate, but we really acknowledge with the ultimate recognition, maximum recognition of those who carry the class, and as we mentioned, it's worthwhile from time to time at least. Arutz Sheva, Israel National News, English of course, and carries this weekly. But if you want to see, there's an advantage of the original website, which is the TanyaOnline.com. One word, TanyaOnline.com website, where you have, first of all, is the way the class itself is set up, that the text is in a separate scroll bar, as such, easy to follow, but namely the access to all previous classes. So which includes the previous class. So last week we spoke about... let's try to do this very brief so we can go to the Achar Kach, because Alter Rebbe is going into the next stage over here. Next stage, we need to say another dimension of the Yid, as the Yid is comprised of body and soul. And last week we spoke about the Neshama of the Yid, Chelik Havayami. The Neshama is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Part of Shem Havaya, as opposed to Shem Elokim. Again, that was the crux of the class last week. That is the difference of Shem Havaya and Shem Elokim, which is the superior dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as opposed to the inferior expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. One is superior, one the inferior, and by far there's no comparison. Simply similar to the investment in words and speech, as opposed to the investment in blowing. It comes from the inner core of the person. That's why we can't blow for a long time. We can talk for a long time, sometimes a little too long, but we can talk for a long time hours and hours a person could really speak. Virtually, there's nothing. Of course, a certain time has to come to a stop, but it could go on and on and on. As opposed to blowing, after a few seconds, one would simply not be able to continue to blow. And the reason is because this is coming from his nefesh, miteche, from his inner core. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, Masar Mamaris, associated with Shem Elokim. When it comes to the neshama, which is the only emanation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, understandably, Torah is also part of the core essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Nechi Hashem Lekecha. But we're talking about the creation, if you will, or the emanation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, neshama coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's coming from a different place completely. It's coming from Shem Havaya. It's coming from the inner workings of Hashem. And we gave a few examples, as you recall, and if you didn't participate in the last weeks, it's really a click away to understand this. As we, they gave a few examples which demonstrate so starkly and clearly the difference of the two. And in the end of the day, there's an infinite difference between the two, the Shem Havaya and Shem Elokim. So the neshama comes from Shem Havaya, Chelik Havaya. And then, though, the neshama has to come into a body. The neshama does not perform without coming into a body. The neshama can't perform without investing into a body. So there's ultimately the composite of body and soul and body. A combination, a composite of both of them establishes the dynamic of the human being, in this case the Yid. We're not talking about the human being, because every human being, everything about them comes from Shem Elokim. When it comes to the Yid, the neshama from Shem Havaya. But yet, the guf, the body, is of course part of the Shem Elokim phenomenon, because the body is associated with the physicality of Elam Hazeh. And everything associated with Elam Hazeh is associated with Shem Elokim. How do we know? Bereshis, Bora, Elokim, Shemaim, Esaretz. And Kol Tzva, everything associated with creation comes from Shem Elokim, comes from the Asar Mamaris, the 10 sayings, Basar Mamaris Nivra Ha'olam. Is the Yid's body part of Olam? Yes, of course it's part of Olam. It's a physical body. And as such, the body dimension of the Yid is clearly associated with Shem Elokim. Now, there's no question when something of Shem Havaya enters such a body, the body immediately establishes, so to say, an inner distinction between the rest of creation. When you host something so lofty, so holy, so deep, like an neshama, which is coming from the deepest parts of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what it will make an impact on the body. Of course it makes an impact on the body. It's hosting. When you're hosting the king, you're home. If you're only a regular person, and even if you're not particularly somebody which knows the tactics of honoring and revering and so on, but instinctively and naturally, when a king walks into your home and he says, "I'm staying for the night," the home will look different, or especially he gives you a heads up. He's coming to stay for the night. The whole home will look different than it looked yesterday, and probably look the way it will look tomorrow. Even though the contrast between today and yesterday would be greater than tomorrow. Oh, my home could host the king. But in the time the king is there, it's a different home. So when a neshama, something so lofty and so great, comes into the body, of course the body of the Yid is also different for that matter. It says Lashon in Zohar, a famous expression in Zohar, Gufa Dulahin Kadisha. The body of the Yid is holy. And understandably so. Because it's hosting the whole Kodesh Kadashim, it's hosting the Chelik Hashem, it's hosting the Neshama, which is part of the Shem Havaya, the most deepest parts within HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But nonetheless, and that's why the Yid, you could tell a Yid from far. It's hard for a Yid to hide his being a Yid, his or her being a Yid. It comes up evidently. Doesn't mean that you can always be 100% correct from the external appearance of it. Not always, but yeah, most of the time, this is a Yid. This is a Jew. Why so? What are you, a neshama, seer? There's certain people have the eyes which are able to detect the neshama, but the average person can't. But nonetheless, because this neshama entered this body and lives with this body so many and so many years, it's not just an impact, an external impact. You see something very distinct in the appearance of the yid vis-a-vis all other human beings, and not deriding, not putting any not deriding in the human beings, but we're talking about the distinction of the yid is manifest and demonstrative even in his body, in his outer appearance. That's how it is. They say we can tell on your nose you're a yid, a famous expression. But there's something to this the whole appearance, definitely. And the simple reason, in other words, the simple reason is because it's hosting on a constant basis a chelik of coming mal mamash, a chelik of Shem Havaya mamash. So naturally, it makes a profound impact on the body and the appearance of the body and everything about the body or the expressions and the natural expressions of a yid demonstrate that this is a yid. But nonetheless, at the end of the day, the physicality of the body, because it's part of Olam, it's part of creation in the end of the day, so it has a connection to Asar Mamois. And this is what the Alter Rebbe says, yeah, there is the goof of the person. But again, it doesn't mean that the goof is going to completely camouflage this, the enormous energy which is right there in front of you when you're looking at the Yid, which is the Neshama, part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, part of Shem Havaya, Chelik Havaya Amai. No, and to some degree, yeah, the body, if someone lives a bodily life and not a soulful life, of course it eclipses one way or another. But nonetheless, it can't take away completely. It can't camouflage it. It can't conceal this dynamic completely because it's too overwhelming. The Yid is a Yid is a Yid is a Yid. That's why the Pintel Yid, famously, comes out all from time to time, and at all times in the life of the lifespan of even one Jew, there's so many experiences that despite he or she will make an attempt and actually live a life which is inclined to bodily desires, to somewhat animalistic desires, and every one of those expressions, of course, somewhat dims the light of the neshama, doesn't erase, doesn't extinguish the light of the neshama, because it's something that it's it cannot be extinguished rather. It cannot be extinguished, of course. But nonetheless, it doesn't shine, and it has an impact, understandably so. But in the same token, the neshama and the guf are ultimately a one entity, meaning the person can make his choices. But even if he doesn't, he makes a choice, and then when you look at the Yid, even someone who made a choice to live a life of constantly giving in to bodily and animalistic, his or her bodily or animalistic desires, in the end of the day, you're able still to detect, it dims the light of the neshama, but behind there is a neshama which will never go away, will never, of course, never be extinguished, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu imbued the neshama into the Yid. So it's going to always be there. The question is, what are you going to find? Are you going to look at the weaknesses of the body, or you're able to pierce straight through to who he or she truly is and deal with that and try to extract that and tell them about it? So that itself would encourage them to live a qualitative life, a life of quality, a life of divinity, a life associated with Torah mitzvahs. Because in the end of the day, that chelik l'kami mal mamish is not going anywhere. It's there. And then if you don't have, then again, every person's different how you look. With your sensory eye, of course, and also the physical eye, you could just look at the soul, or you will ignore this chelik l'kami mal. And then if you don't ignore it and you look straight through it, you find the commonality, immediate the commonality between you and the other party, because you both have in common, you both have a part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the other within you, and as such you're dealing with the other Yid in It's not like I'm coming over to you to help you. Just you are me and I am you, because we both have a part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like Dr. Rebbe's famous expression in Perek Lamed Beis, 32nd chapter. Also a click away, L'kutei Amorim, the first segment, which is incredible in a few lines. What a description. We're truly one. And that's the way you deal with another Yid. Not I'm coming to help you. It's just, I see the real you. And if you don't have those sensory eyes, at least, or if you don't have that, if you don't have that vision, that appreciation of another Yid as something natural, you can work on it. And you're meant to work on it. But one thing is clear: when you look at another Yid, you're looking, at the end of the day, of somebody. If it's because it becomes natural to you, it doesn't become natural to you, or you're able to identify it, the spirit of the neshama, and react react as such, or to you it's a knowledge, and perhaps dry, meaning to say that you don't have that sentimental connection to the other Yid, because you're not identifying with this the way you're meant to identify with it. It doesn't take away the fact that at least cognitively you should know, and you look that based on the realities that every single Yid, whoever it is, he has a chelik al-kami mal mamash within him or her. So you should know that, and when you know that, at least cognitively, and you deal with another Yid, and another Yid, certainly you will see. The more you will deal with them, the more you will deal with them from that perspective, from that lens, that perspective and point of view, the more you will see the commonality between you and that other Yid. The more you will be able to identify be'emes, the chelik al-kami mal mamash, to really see it, understand it, appreciate it, and deal with it in a way that similar to the way you're dealing with your own neshama, because it's always there and it's there to stay for perpetuity. As long as the Yid lives in Elam Hazeh and then beyond the Gan Eden and so on, it's there. Together with that, in the end of the day, but you have to look through a guf. So the guf will indicate that the person's a Yid, but the guf itself doesn't have is associated with Hashem Elikim. That's why there's the chokhmah. In other words, I just say this what I just mentioned the last few minutes. It's that the wisdom of looking beyond the outer veneer, the outer surface, and looking straight to the neshama. And that's the way we're meant to. The Yid himself has to prioritize always the neshama over the guf. That's also the message there in Perek Lamed Beis. But with that spirit, not only of my own, but to see, because I prioritize my neshama over my guf, I look at another Yid, I also don't compare the two and see the chelik of vaya amei, as opposed to the guf, which comes from Shem Elokim. So in the end, Alter Rebbe is saying that the guf itself, the body, is understandably associated with the Shem Elokim, because it's part of Elam Hazeh. So v'achakach yorda b'seisel madrega. The same neshama comes down. The seisel madrega literally means in the hiddenness, madrega of the levels, which means it comes down level after level, till through these isis of the maimer nasa adam, because part of the asar ma'amores which nivra ha'elo was nasa adam b'tzal meinu kid mesayim. Hashem said, "Let us create." Of course, it's Hashem talking to his malachim, bezdin and shalmayla malachim, as it says, the Medrash says. But ultimately, this is one of the maimorim. Let's make a man. Let's make man, and then Hashem does form man with clay and so on, as it says in the pasuk, that Hashem establishes the Adam similar to the way Hashem established all of creation. For that matter, Nasa Adam is one of the Asara Ma'amores. As we explained last week in detail, the Ma'amores associated with Shem Elikim, the inferior expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Those are the Ma'amores. And the Guf, the Adam, comes from the Maimer. not from the Shem Havai. The Maimer, Masar Mamor, is directly associated with Shem Elikim. Bereshis Bar Elikim is Shemaim Azor. Through the Bereshis Nami Maimer, as Gemara says, this is the Asar Mamoris which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, which again is the inferior dimension. We gave an example the other day. You see in the previous class. The professor comes to say, and this words coming from the professors and the same professor, and then words coming from his mouth which are just not worth to mention, not worth to hang up my coat. He tells one of his accomplices, hang up my coat, and he starts a moment later with his presentation, his essay. It's coming from the same person, but we don't dignify, we don't make a fuss. Everybody says it, or he, of course, take my coat and hang it up. It's not part of his presentation, it's not part of his, it's his own words. It's coming from the same person, but it's not something which symbolizes him, of who he is, what he stands for, his grand investment, many years of study which made him who he is, as this great, knowledgeable, scholarly professor. It's when he begins his essay, that's who he is. So the Mamoris are the most inferior. The Lashon again we mentioned last week, quite a few times. It's simple. It's simple. These words, Hadyeta, means words of simple words, which are not meant to be dignified. So the point of everything is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to fuse the two, the neshama and guf, spirit and matter. The superior dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the L'shem yichud kushu b'richa u'shchinte. That's the point of the neshama coming down into this world. We mentioned this many times. The fusion of the two, asara kaf b'shekel HaKadosh, to fuse the asar mamoris with the asaras adibris. And that is accomplished through every mitzvah. I take the material, I elevate it, I sublimate it. I introduce this Shem Havaya, I introduce the Emes Hashem La'ila, because I have that motor within me as a Yid, that part of me is the Shem Havaya, Chelik Havaya Ame, so I can introduce it into Eilam, which will ultimately come to its full culmination and fruition when Mashiach will come, of course. And that's why Lo Yesek Kol Elam Kol Elam Das Hashem, the only thing that would be real is the knowledge of God. Ki Malor is Deus Hashem, and again Hashem Hashem, but we mentioned this quite a few times, just the direction why Hashem sent the neshama down into this world. What is the purpose? But here we're talking about the makeup of the neshama, and then verse in contrast to the makeup of the body. The body is part of the Asara Mamaris. Nasa Adam is one of the Mamaris. And the reason is because Hashem wanted the neshama to come down in this physical world. So he creates a guf which is associated with Elam Hazah. And that will be the guf, the body, which will host this neshama, in order the neshama has a place to come down. Why does the neshama have to come down? Why does it stay up there? We just mentioned. The Yid is a mandate, to establish for HaKadosh Baruch Hu a dwelling place in this very physical world. So that's what he says, in order the neshama to come down into the body in this physical world. Back to the malachim which we said, that even if you remember last week, we said Tzva Shamayim not only includes the physical heaven, and the heavenly army of the physical plane, but even the metaphysical plane, meaning to say the true Tzva or the Tzva Shamayim. We say Tzva Shamayim, spiritual Tzva Shamayim, these are the malachim, the celestial malachim. And as we mentioned, they're all still part of the package of Sar Mamoris, of Shem Elikim. So it goes back, therefore the malachim are called B'Shem Elikim. The malachim are also called with the name Elikim, because of the pasuk, because of Hashem Elikechem, Elikei Elikim, that Hashem, your God, is the God of the Elikim. In other words, He's your God and He's the God of malachim. Or it says, Haidu Elikei Elikim. Praise, submit to the God of Elikim. Who's this Elikim? There's no other Elikim, there's no other gods other than the grand Elikim, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But ever HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Chas v'Shalom not referring in this pasuk to any other deities, Chas v'Shalom, but in those who live a godly life. They're extremely on the high, meaning to say their whole presence their whole image, their whole demeanor as angels is godly. And this is what Hashem is referring to, but yet, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is always using the terminology of Elikim. The Pasuk is always using the terminology of Elikim when it comes to Malachim. For this very reason, because even Malachim were created from Shem Elikim. It says also, famous story with Bayiv, and it says, B'nei Elikim, the Malachim came to stand in front of Hashem, in the context of judgment, of the being of the that point to his Eve, and so on, which is really the message, as it says regarding Rosh Hashanah, the Din of Rosh Hashanah, is there is the Malachim which come to the heavenly court and point out the different deeds or misdeeds, and so on and so forth, committed by the Yid, positive Malachim, Achmanos on the opposite. So the Pasuk uses the terminology Ha'elikim. Vayavayu b'nei Elikim, referring to Malachim. B'nei Ha'elikim doesn't say b'nei Shem Havaya or Havaya, because Malachim have no connection to Shem Havaya, and they're part of the package of Elikim. And the reason is because the nourishment of their energy also comes from the externality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the Eisis Levad, just the letters. And Shem Elikim is B'chinas Chitzeni, is Shkab Shem Havaya, and so too Shem Elikim is external and inferior vis-a-vis Shem Havaya, as we explained at length last week, a click away. Lishmas Adam was opposed to the neshama of the person, the Yid, Pnimis Achayis. It comes from the inner energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a chelik Shem Havaya Baruch Hu. It's part of the Shem Havaya, not Elikim. Shem Havaya Meir al Pnimis Achayis. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakei olam. So Shem Havaya is Kashem Havaya Meira al Pnimius Hachayis Shila Maila Maila Pnimis, because the name Havaya, like we explained, demonstrates the Pnimius, the inner workings of Hashem, the inner energy, which is Lamaila. Not that ever uses a double lashon Lamaila. Lamaila Maila Pnimis. It's like, it's not only double, as we understand that, based on what we said before, the difference is infinite. This which would come from Shem Havaya in comparison to which would come from Shem Elikim. This would come from Shem Elikim, and this would come from Shem Havaya. The difference is infinite. And when you're talking about that tells you that the Neshama of the Yid, in comparison to all of creation, in comparison to his body, of course, but even in comparison to Malachim, Malachi Maila, Malachi Asharis. Those who don't for a moment stop serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu for a moment and stand with love and fear and awe. Everything we actually say this, we mentioned last week, Gebenim, Kadeshim, Ahuvim, Brurim, these are terminology we say in Birchas Kishma about the Malachim. We think about a Malach. He doesn't have a Yetzer Hara. He's so close to Hashem. Everything about them exudes a divine spirit based on their total submission to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yet they still come from the Isis, associated with Shem Elikim, as opposed to the Neshama, which is a Chelik Elokami Mal. Hence the Neshama being infinitely greater than the Malach, by definition. And of course of all the other parts of creation, physical. For this, the creation as we know it, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim es haaretz, ba'asarim ha'amoris nivraim, with the 10 sayings, Hashem brought creation into being. These are the sayings, these are the Asias, these are this is inferior expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ubira, and Alter Rebbe continues, Keneidim imay melio, antu da pikas asar tikunin, v'korin on lei asar svira. To understand this, explanation of this, and what is Alter Rebbe explaining over here? Rebbe, in this chapter, we did touch upon this idea that because the Yid, last week as well, because the Yid has a neshama part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu within him, so he functions different. He has a part of Hashem in him. He's able to, he spoke about the four levels, Yud Ke Vav Ke, Chochma, Bina, Midas, Malchus, Chochma, Chabad. Person is able, a Yid is able to intellectualize godly matters as if they, in a way, is not as a concept, removed and abstract from him, but really appreciate it in a way that, like he appreciates anything else, with any human being would appreciate with their cognitive faculties. A Yid is able to intellectualize on matters of Elokus, and it becomes real to him. And why so? Because he has that chip within him. He has, as part of his hard drive. We mentioned this last week. A Yid is Abba V'Yira. It's not that he has to go elsewhere to find some Abba V'Yira and to introduce it into his system as a Yid. He has the whole makeup. He has the whole Yud Ke Vav Ke, which Vav is also the Midas, the 6 Midas. Chesed Gvura, associated with Abba V'Yira. It's part of who he is. He has to uncover, he has to work to extrapolate that Abba V'Yira, of course, like anything else. A person has to do some exercise in order to get his, muscles to express themselves in their full capacity. But he's not creating that muscle. The muscle's there. And so too, every other talent, you have to work on it in order to extract it and to bring it to its maximum expression and maximum and successful expression. And so too, the Abba V'Yira, of course we have to work on it. Tivakshena, things, Perik, Lashon Al-Terebe, Perik Membeis, worthwhile to. Membeis L'Kuti Amorim, also click away. Speaks about that, we have to put in effort. You have to put in a lot of effort, like in everything else in life. They say no pain, no gain. But the chiddush is that you're not bringing it from an outer place and incorporating it and inculcating it into your system. This is who you are. So the Alter Rebbe is going to start, and this is the ultimate message, which is the culmination of this very chapter. Yeah, there's still some time to go, but with this chapter, the Alter Rebbe begins to say, what is the Shem Havaya? We talk about the Shem Havaya on high, and then on the following page, the Alter Rebbe says, "V'kocha mamish," how every single Yid has this part of his hard drive. So he says, what is it on high? He says, what is the Shem Havaya? The 10 spheres. Again, the Shem Havaya, corresponding to the 10 spheres, we know the Yud is Chochma, the Hey is Bina, the Vav is the 6 Midas, and the final Hey is Malchus. Of course, Das is what connects the Meichin to Midas. We spoke about this in the unique faculty of Das, the end of the 3rd chapter, in L'Kutei Amorim, also click away. So we have all the 10 spheres, all associated with Yud Ke Vav Ke, the Shem Havaya. So these 10 spheres, he starts explaining about these 10 spheres. It's known from the saying of Eliyahu in the Pasach Eliyahu, famous Pasach Eliyahu. We say this before Shabbos as well, before Mincha and Shabbos. Antu, Tapikas Asar Tikunim, you are Hashem, that from you allow to extend from yourself the 10 Tikunim, which referring to the 10 spheres. Tikunin, they call spheres, they call tikunin. Alter Rebbe has in the Kutei. The tikunin, they're called tikunin because they beautify. Like a tachshit is called a tikun, and because they beautify. Kaviyachal HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have to be beautified. Hashem, who He is, in any the name Fakir, the opposite of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the deeper HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. That's really the real deal of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Deeper and yet deeper. The spheres, midas, are already a yerida kaviyah. It's a descent from the pshitas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but nonetheless, because we know in our mind, we appreciate the phenomenon of Chochmah, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Midas, and then the cognitive faculties again, Chochmah, Bina, Das, Malchus. So it carries a certain message of beauty. That's the lashon of Alter Rebbe there in Teirair. That's what they call tikuni. They're misaking. They bring correction. They bring beauty. Or the beauty itself is the way they're the correcting point. That's the explanation there, the Alter Rebbe, why it's called Sikunim. But we're talking about this Karina Lahain. And so Eliyahu Navi says we call these Asar Tikunin, Asar Sfiran. Esser Sfiran rather, 10 spheres. Which again, these are the 10 spheres. No, Chacham Minadas, Chassid Bur Tiferes, Tiferes, Netzach Yisei Malchus. Ladha, the reason why Hashem did this, allowed from him to come the 10 spheres, Ladha Gavein Stimin. And then eventually, L'chulu, which means all these Galion, which means HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to create and conduct worlds. So this would be the interface between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Eilumus, because you cannot create Eilumus from an infinite God. Is only an expression rather of infinity. The Eilam is just the opposite of the infinite. Eilam by definition. We bring numerous times, the Eilam, B'lashon Helam Behester, the Gemara Neiruvin. The definition of Eilam, it conceals over the reality of God. Particularly the lower the Eilam is. Yeah, we're living in an Eilam that doesn't have any independent life other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and yet on its own does not demonstrate the reality of God. We have to bring the notion of Hashem Echad into Eilam. That's what we proclaim every day. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. The entire world has to know, as the famous Rashi, that everything is ultimately Hashem, and Hashem is everything. Ve'emes Hashem la'olam, and that's the avodah of the Yid, because he has Hashem, chelik alaka, mimal, chelik abayam. He introduces this energy into Hashem, into the Asarim Amaris. But the world on its own, pre-avodah, Chilul Hester. So how does from an infinite God come in Eilam? Well, Hashem could do whatever he wants, true. But Hashem established that things should work based on the rules of the Seder Ishtalshlus, the order, the chain, the order of Ishtalshlus means the evolution of the on high to below is something which is Hashem established that it should make sense one way or another. Even though the Eibishter is and understandably the Eibishter was always beyond. He created sense, he created common sense, he created seichel, and so on. But Hashem wanted that the evolution from Kodesh Baruch Hu, the Pshitas, the way that Kodesh Baruch Hu stands higher than everything, for himself, by himself, till an Eilam would come, should be something, a sense of order. And the order over here is that this would be the interface that from an infinite God, ultimately we can have Eilamus, finite Eilamus. These are the 10 spheres. And again, we spoke about this in the past, which is not this main idea. Just to repeat this quickly. Eilam is just the antithesis of Elokus. Especially you're talking about the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Has from infinity come something so finite like an Eilam, and all Eilam for that matter, because Eilam by definition is Lashon Hela V'Hester. The answer is you have the interface of these 10 spheres, which carries the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yet there's the Keli would be Chachma, Bina, and Das, and Chesed, namely Malchus, which would be Malchus Kol Eilamim. So we spoke about this again in the past, why the spheres become that intermediary, an interface between Ein Sof and Eilamus. The Ein Sof, the infinite God, and Eilamus, all levels of Eilamus. Eilamus, Almud Stimin, Almud Yizgal, he says there in Pasach Leo. And he starts, he says, Ad Chakim Li B'Chachmi Indiyah. The Chachma of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Natzilus, which is the first level of setup, the first formal, overt level of setup of these 10 spheres. I say overt because the Esher spheres are gnuzis, not to go into it now. And of course, no comparison. They're called ganuz also. They're called deeper and more hidden in comparison to Eilam HaBriya. But generally, the structure of Esher spheres are in Eilam HaAtzilus. So what he's going to do is, B'ez Hashem will continue next week, is that he's going to show you what is Chachma B'Kodesh Baruch Hu. What is the Bina B'Kodesh Baruch Hu? And then actually, it's not that you can figure it out, Chachma, because it's about Kodesh Baruch Hu. Not in the Chachma, the knowledge, the known Chachma, the way we understand what Chachma is. Bina Atmi B'Lei as the Alter Rebbe continues. But nonetheless, it's the Chachma, true B'Lei the Chachma Yediyah, Bina B'Lei B'Yediyah, but nonetheless, Chachma it is, Bina it is. And then he goes on how he's going to explain all the midas, how it functions on high. And eventually he's going to say, we have that whole system within ourselves. Therefore, by definition, the quality of the Yid, not only the pintel Yid, but everything of the Yid just allows that neshama to come to manifestation. He doesn't block it. We have to be careful, as Yidin. It is, of course, the first thing is never to be made of b'malchus shamayim. He has to be careful not to violate, not to sin, not in action, nor in speech, nor in thought, because every aveda, every transgression is a rebellion. In Melech Malchem Lachem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, very grave, the King of all kings tells you, standing there, says, don't do that, don't speak that, don't think that, don't look there, and so on. So it should, that itself, be fear and awe and beyond. This is the message of Baal Treb and Perik Mem Aleph, the first page of Perik Mem Aleph. Click away as well in L'Kutei Amorim. So of course there's the Merida, and then the idea of the connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through every mitzvah, positive deed, positive action, positive speech, positive thought, and so on. And that's really our focus, and we're serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's the servitude, it's submission to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on all levels. But we should know also, and I want to call it selfish because at the end of the day it's really all interconnected. When we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we do what we're supposed to do, and we don't do, speak, think what we're not supposed to, we allow the neshama to be transparent. We allow it in a total manifestation of the neshama. And when the neshama is manifest, we sense that we're on a different plane. We're different, and not only different, but uniquely distinct from any other part of Hashem's creation, but namely not a matter of I'm greater, you're not. No, simply to be able to experience the enormity of the gift of being part of Shem Havai. We think different, and not only think different, we have the ability to intellectualize godly realities, and it's real to us like a cup in a table. It's the thought of it is astronomical. We could think Elokus, we could appreciate Elokus. How could a Niver appreciate Elokus? Usually a Niver cannot. But we have the whole, it's part of our DNA, we have the whole hard drive of Shem Havai, so we could. And we could have an Ibina. We could have a Chesed similar to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We have a Gvura similar, in other words, true Ava, true love, true fear. We could live in a higher plane, namely appreciate it in a way that it becomes really something which is exciting to us because this is who we really are. And when we allow that transparency of the neshama, of course, Yiddishkeit and the excitement of Yiddishkeit takes another step in ways that are become extraordinary. Our learning Torah, which is going to say the Vov and the pursuit to mitzvahs, to do mitzvahs behidur, it becomes default and it becomes exciting, it becomes sensational, because the neshama is just playing out. The default of the neshama, this is default of the neshama, it just plays out its natural play out, meaning to say its natural presentation. And as such, we connect with this which is real in such an exciting and natural. It's natural. It's like breathing is the most exciting thing a person can do by definition, because that's his life. This becomes chay. That's why Tanya is called Chayenu Berech Yomeinu, because this is who we are, and we can live on a total different plane, and that different plane becomes an exciting plane, exciting life, and truly exciting and truly sensational, truly sensational, because this is who we are. So, additional to all the other serious dimensions of Yid's adherence to the letter of the law, as Limitatis Kima Mitzvahs, being careful with the Leisesa, on top of that, and together with that, again, it's all really intertwined, allows the neshama to just breathe and express itself. And as such, it truly becomes very exciting. Have a wonderful